Welcome, everybody. Hope you're doing well wherever you are. David here with this week's Griscom stream. Got some fun stuff to get to, a couple quick stories. But as always, feel free to drop a question in the chat. Always happy to hear from y'all. Yeah, depending on how many questions we get today, it might be a little bit of a shorter one. So if you want to get anything in, now is certainly the time. We got a fun show coming up this week. We're going to be joined by our friends Derek and Danny over at from the American Prestige podcast. You can also find their work over at Foreign Exchange as well. Going to be a lot of fun. We're talking about Saudi Arabia, Yemen, a little bit of the fallout after the Summit of the Americas nightmare, and much, much more. I mean, they're always a hell of a lot of fun having the pod. And again, if you're not already following that show, you really should. It's definitely one of our favorites. But yeah, y'all, certainly happy to take some questions. I think later up this week for patrons, we're going to be releasing a conversation with Derek Varn, who's going to be joining us to talk about the right wing and the kind of ideology behind the modern conservative movement, but more specifically on the question of whether or not right-wing populism exists. And if it does, what is its appeal? So really looking forward to releasing that for patrons this Sunday. And if you missed it, we had a really fun think tank that came up last week where we were taking some questions. We even had some people submit questions from people who aren't patrons or socialists, sort of questioning us on questions like Marxist theory of class. Very, very, very fun. But yeah, I'm just getting stoked, y'all. I was right before this, I got lost because I found an incredible YouTube Iranian American chef breaking down some really, really nice kubadeh recipes for Iranian kebabs and jujay, which I think I'm going to get into this weekend. But yeah, let's see if we got anything in there. Oh yeah, don't forget, y'all, to our friend Straw McCallum, who's here in the chat. It's always good to see you. We'll be launching their YouTube channel, I think, tomorrow. It's already up. You should give it a follow. Really looking forward to seeing what he's going to be putting up over there. But yeah, y'all, let's see. Well, maybe I'll get into this conversation, this story here to start, and then I'll answer some questions. Oh, that's funny. Varn and my father from the same neighborhood. Fascinating. I didn't know that. I think this is a phone. Someone's asked me thoughts on the Tundra, the Toyota Tundra. I mean, Toyota just in general, y'all. I mean, this isn't a car pod or anything like that, but Toyota makes good trucks and good vehicles. I would feel confident in buying most of them. And they last forever, too. Kowalski has a question for me. David, does it ever come across your news feed? Ogallala aquifer in the Texas Panhandle. No, I'm not familiar with that. But certainly send some stuff my way. Excuse me, Lord. Well, why don't we get into this bit here, and then I'll answer some questions. How about that? How's that sound to y'all? The title of this episode is moving just transition from slogan to reality. And it's something, it's a question that's really started to dominate my work and at least my interest over the past few months, because, I remember when Bernie Sanders first laid out the Green New Deal platform, we were flying to Chicago, Illinois with TMBS to do our Chicago live show, which was a hell of a lot of fun. I had family there as well, which was really sweet. But I remember as I had taken off, the plan just got released. So I was reading it while we were in the air. And I was just really inspired by the plan that Bernie was putting out, because it really started to break through a lot of the problems that I had sort of felt, I think, implicitly with the environmental movement beforehand. It had sort of worked through a lot of those problems. It's actually trying to make a climate change policy that not only would be effective at reducing our carbon emissions and making sure that the planet is livable, but something that also felt politically viable and hopeful, and something that was extremely motivating. And a big part of that was certainly the just transition. And I think most people probably are familiar with the general framework of the just transition, but the Bernie transition was set up around the idea of making sure that unions were leading the transition, and also that people who are already working in the fossil fuel industry or in industries that might have to see some kind of cutback from their emissions, that those jobs, those people who work in those industries would have secured income for a transitionary period, so they wouldn't be losing income in the near future, and that those unions that worked in those industries would be leading the charge into building new energy sources for the future. And I just remember seeing that plan and the way it was put forward, assuming that's so common sense, because so much of the way that a lot of liberalism treats the environmental question is it's about subtraction and not addition, right? Where you're going to be getting less, and you should be happy for it, which is just never going to win politically, and it's also a very, very bleak future. And I always note, despite some people who might have other intentions with that kind of argument, what you're going to get when that goes and becomes mediated through the American political process is more likely than not austerity. And you're already seeing that. I hopefully have a piece coming out in the next couple weeks for a big lefty publication, won't say the name here, on basically the climate fight in Texas and how it's a bit of a preview for what climate politics would probably look like, not just in this country, but around the world, as governments start to recognize that something has to be done, right? But they don't have the political will or the ability to take on the fossil fuel industry. So so in the absence of these kind of labor left coalitions that were sort of laid out in Bernie's Green New Deal, that will basically be seeing this kind of anarchic neoliberal solution to climate change. And what that's probably going to mean is personal choice and a protection for the bottom line and profits of the fossil fuel industry, and two big middle fingers to the workers, right? And in Texas, you're starting to see that play out. So during the COVID pandemic, you saw an extreme drop in the demand for oil. And what did that mean? That meant that a lot of these facilities slowed down or cut production entirely, and they fired people. And nearly 100,000 people in Texas who work in that industry lost their job during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that always felt like a very, very worrying kind of preview as to what would happen. So let's drop the climate arguments for a second, just talking about the industry and the people in it, of what would happen in some kind of circumstances where, like, let's say everybody wakes up tomorrow, they were like, climate change is a big problem and we're going to deal with it. Far-fetched, and that's not going to happen. We're going to have to fight to make that happen. But let's just say there's a switch gets flicked, and all the oil executives wake up tomorrow and they're like, "Oh no, we can't do this anymore." Well, the way that the system would function, under given the kind of current political map, would be that you would just see mass layoffs for workers, some protections for investors and the executive suite, and you would see this unnatural coalition start building up. Where, well, it's not even unnatural, it's very reasonable, where people would see their livelihood being threatened by climate policy, and would be fighting against it, when the Green New Deal proposes a solution to that by basically saying you're going to have guaranteed income and a job, not just a good job, but hopefully an even better job than what you have right now, right? I'm losing my train of thought, excuse me. What we're seeing in Texas right now is this kind of preview of what will happen, where you're seeing these kind of punishments of workers in that industry. So you saw that with the layoffs, and now you're starting to see it with, like, ExxonMobil, for example, has been pushing this very, very hardcore decertifying campaign against unions there. And of course, these are coming internally, but these are coming because the companies are putting pressure on the unions to try to make it seem to the workers within those unions that having a union contract is not in their best interest, right? And that's a decision that is made by the top brass of the corporation. There's no doubt about it that as conditions are worsening in the industry, that these industries are saying, okay, well, this is a great opportunity for us to get rid of USW, right? Steel workers, etc. Like, this is a great, like, let's make it even worse for people in the short term so that we can get rid of all of this pesky union representation in the industry and just deal with people as individuals, because we want to do whatever we want with them, right? So you're seeing that playing out with people who work in the oil and gas industry or just fossil fuel industry at large, right? This kind of big anti-union push, more precarity, and a kind of threat to communities and people's livelihood in the short term and in the long term too. Um, and then on the other side, when it comes to green energy, that's a system that is completely dominated at this point by green capitalists. And they're importing the same kind of BS into that field as existed in all the other industries, right? Solar panel installers have an extremely high rate of injury because they're being paid per panel, which means that they have every interest in trying to install as many as quickly as possible, which means people are, doing dangerous things like trying to lift up an entire panel by themselves on a ladder on a 100-degree day, because they know that the only way that they're going to get paid is if these get installed in an extremely, extremely short window of time. Right. So you have that kind of just general exploitation in the industry. And in Texas, all these things are sort of framed as personal choice, individual choice, which is very worrying just because you could see a future where wealthy neighborhoods basically have nice green energy and the rest of us have underfunded public power that has been purposefully attacked by capitalists and by politicians for decades here, right? And you're just seeing this like a huge mess that's playing out in Texas, and I'll have more on that hopefully in the near future. But I see that as a very dire warning, not just because of its immediate effects here, but because that is certainly going to be the model that we're going to be seeing state by state, country by country, if there isn't this kind of democratic socialist, pro-worker, pro-union, pro-labor agenda leading the fight in climate change. And what's really worrying for me is that because so much of the argument around what should we about climate change has been, do you believe in the science or do you not believe in the science? That I don't think that the general population of people who believe that climate change is real and is a threat and want to do something about it have really reckoned with what that transition will look like. Because every indication that we're getting right now is that, yeah, we'll see some changes and we'll see some transition, but it very likely won't be better. And in some cases, it could actually be worse than the current arrangement, right? And that's something that's very dangerous and something that socialists, should not be blasé about, because it's a real direct threat, not only to action on climate change, right? Because if you create it as a negative, right, if transferring away from fossil fuels becomes an immediate decline in your standard of living, means you're going to lose your job or your uncle's going to lose their job, etc. Right? You create this unnecessary burden in actually trying to transition. But also because this is a very, very historic moment where we have the ability and the need, and it's direct and people can see it and recognize it, to do something drastic, to reorganize and reformulate our economy. And I think it would be a real shame is if we just sort of continue down the neoliberal path over the next few decades here, which will mean more exploitation, which will mean more inequality, and will certainly mean that any kind of solution will be half-baked to actually seriously lowering our emissions, right? This is a very, very dire and important political moment, and I don't think we've built up the kind of political consciousness or even just economic and scientific consensus on our side to really start making the demands that we make when we say we want to change the system entirely. So we're seeing this moment, and it's something that I've just been thinking about a lot. And I saw this video. This is Jane McAlevey. This is from a. Let me pull this up for y'all right quick, so I give them the proper citation. Where did I put it? Here we go. This is from an account called The Green New Deal and the Future of Work, which I believe is a book that will be coming out from Columbia University Press in 2022. Which I guess has already happened, but I'm not familiar with it. But I just want to shout out the organization before I play this video. But this is an interview with her, and I think this is a pretty strong point for the climate left and democratic socialists in general to reckon with.
I think that people who are doing Green New Deal work need to get quickly schooled on like what it means to have a good job, and then say it. You don't just say good job, because it sounds like a bunch of BS. since the early 1970s, we have been heaving jobs. Like literally, there have been like job losses year after year after year with factories moving to other parts of the world. And what people have promised, especially Democrats, by the way, is don't worry, it's going to be good for you in the end. We're creating a lot of jobs in America. And what they don't say, but what workers know, is that the jobs that they're creating are crap jobs with very low standards, with little to no benefits, without the kind of defined benefit pension that people used to have. We hear a lot of talk connected to the Green New Deal about good jobs. And people are just sort of saying, oh, we need to have good jobs. No one's actually defining that. And there's several things that I think people have to do all the time starting now. One is, it's not saying good jobs. It's saying trade union organized jobs that match, meet the exact standards that workers in the fossil fuel industry are currently earning. If you look at the states that sadly were won by Donald Trump on the margins in 2016, it's the states where workers were promised, don't worry, there'll be good jobs for you when your factory goes out of the country. That's no different than when Green New Dealers say, don't worry, when we end the actually high-paying, unionized with good benefits, like substantial health care and retirement benefits, don't worry, there'll be good jobs for you. We'll offer job retraining. We'll create jobs. American workers have been hearing that for about 45 years, and frankly, it's a bold-faced lie. That's not to say I'm not 1,000% behind the Green New Deal. That is why I'm at this conference. I worked in the environmental movement for a decade before I went into the trade union movement. I'm also really frustrated by the lack of clarity about how the policies are addressed, like how people talk about good jobs. Stop saying it. Like, be very specific. We have to hold the standard. To do that, we have to shift the subsidies. That takes tremendous power. That's what has to happen as part of the Green New Deal discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear case that's made there. But just to expand on it, and if people aren't familiar with Jane McAlevy's work, you should definitely be checking it out. Um, but like the point here is something that I hear a lot when I talk to my friends who are in the union movement, that we can come up with all the phrasings that we want on these things, but until you start showing up and showing the capability and the capacity to win, and also that you understand what you're talking about, people don't believe you, because as Jane says in that clip, union workers have been being fed a lot of stuff from the Democratic Party, and maybe not as loud, but also from the left too. And frankly, at a certain point, it starts to become hard to believe. And we can talk about, oh, the future will be great, everyone's gonna be taken care of, et cetera, et cetera. But until you start showing people that you understand their needs today, and you understand what their needs will be in the future, and you can also demonstrate the capacity and the capability to being able to make those things into a reality, people are going to treat it as as a pipe dream. And it's something that, like, you know I've just been reckoning with more, because again, like, I'm a big supporter of just transition, but I'm seeing um, it become more and more clear that it can't just be this kind of slogan that we hold on to. It actually has to not only be a commitment, but I think something that we're really wrapping our heads around, and understanding how we want to build the movement and the capacity to be able to do it. And I mean, I'm just going to be blunt about this, because a lot of people on the left too are very sensitive about being honest about the fact that a lot of the jobs that we're seeing in the green industry right now are bad. They're bad jobs, as I was noting about, particularly residential home installation of solar panels. Not a good job. And it's not a model for what we want to be promising people in the union movement, workers in general. We need to be arguing for, it's not about the technology itself, right? That's a whole other conversation. It's about the work, the pay, the protections, and the security that come with that work. And right now, it is certainly not meeting the moment. And the green industry is one of those things where, because it has this kind of halo around it, a lot of people feel like, oh, well, we'll accept some bad working conditions because it's really important, right? Or we'll accept really dubiously created products, like the panels that are coming in from China right now, which are ripe with labor abuses throughout that supply line, right? He was saying, like, "Oh, we'll just ignore that," when they wouldn't with any other industry, and they're all making the argument at the exact same time that this is the future, right? Well, if you're pointing at jobs that aren't meeting even the abysmal conditions of things that are already exist in the oil and gas industry, or dirty energy at large industry, and you're saying that's the future to people, they're going to look at you with suspicion, and they're not going to trust the future that you're trying to promote to them. And it makes it seem like when you talk about labor and respecting workers, that you're full of crap. Because if you're not willing to recognize the fights that are currently ongoing, how can anybody trust you in the future, right? And this is a very, very important thing, I think, for democratic socialist people who support the Green New Deal, to really start reckoning with what you're asking and what you're promoting. The next model will be, because I don't think that there has been enough of an investigation into what that is. But I think I've introduced some stuff. I'll be happy to go through questions. I'll start at the top and work my way down. We'll see how much time we have. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very important challenge for us to rise to meet. Zane says y'all need to come to Chicago again. I would love to come back to Chicago. My brother and sister lived there for a little bit, not any no longer. They're back here, but I miss being able to go and visit Chicago. I'm Myth says, David, how do you think the California water crisis should be integrated into political strategies? Well, I'll just say in general, it's the same kind of thing with public power and energy, right? Is that these are things that affect all of us in the most basic level, right? The ability to have clean drinking water, the ability to make sure that you have power in your house. These are industries that touch all people, every facet of our lives. And these kind of questions, I think, from a socialist perspective, right? We need to be making the argument that these things that touch us all, right, that affect us dramatically like this, should have much more democratic accountability than we have right now. And the scary thing about water in particular is that the trend is going the opposite direction with mass water privatization. And we need to be pushing back against that, but also making the positive case, right, that we are pushing for a system that allows us to have much more influence over these things that are so disastrous to us. Now, I'm not an expert on what's going on in California, but for example, the Rio Grande here in Texas, it went dry in portions of it, right? And it's the Rio Grande, right? I don't need to do a translation for folks for you to understand what that river's name implies. But what's going on there, right? Certainly climate change, but also the way that water is being used by private entities. And that has a downstream effect, literally, on other people's, right? And it's absurd that we live in a society as complex as the one that we have today, where we're allowing this kind of anarchic system with a lack of planning and centralization to create these kind of crises. And I think introducing it into that realm of a question of not just, you know, ecology and general preservation, but also introducing that question of democracy and who gets to have a say over what's being done to the water that we all require to survive, would be a way that I would jump into it. Ron notes, climate change legislation has to be framed in a manner which supports the working class. Planting trees, personal responsibility, and Tesla won't cut it. I definitely agree with that. Joshua says, nice shave. Thank you. Yeah, it's feeling a little old. I'm only going to be 20 for a little bit longer. I need to make sure that I look my age every once in a while. Lenny Power says, hey, David, I'm more involved with my union. Based on the union voting recommendation, it's liberal, and I want to infuse more leftist ideas within my circle of influence. Any reading recommendations? Well, I would definitely suggest, if you want a good labor history, I think one of the best books on that is Mike Davis's Prisoners of the American Dream. I think somebody whose work is incredibly useful in reading and understanding, not just on a theoretical level, but on a, let's build a roadmap to success, is the work of Jane McAlevey. Also, I mean, you're already in it, but it might be worthwhile checking out, if you haven't already, DSA's rank and file strategy, which I think is a very, very encouraging development in DSA's national strategies as well. for that kind of work. Friend John asked me some stuff about Perkins. I'm not familiar with what you mean there. I'm sorry, but they said, "How would you define yourself as a socialist?" I mean, I'm a socialist. I think that is enough. I think that sometimes people get very worked up about labels, and that has a little bit less to do with their commitments, but just sort of imagining themselves in different historical moments on what side of the guy, what guys you'd be lined up with. I don't think that's particularly helpful. But yeah, I mean, I hope that's not a non-answer. But generally, I just think that like really fixating on those kind of labels is unhelpful because I'm a socialist because I'm from the working class, and I've seen how the system squeezes us and exploits us. And I also believe that when we stand up and fight together, we can not only prevent bad things from happening to us, we can actually build a much, much better world. And that's frankly beyond anything else. All the books, all of the history, like that's where my commitment begins. And I draw a lot of my stuff from that, frankly. All right, I'm trying to see. Daredevil says about Jane. She explains the idea so well. I honestly haven't thought about this much. It really is a empty talking point currently. And like I don't want to be too harsh on. I mean, again, I started off. If you came in late, I started off saying like the first time that like I really started to wrestle with the possibility of a just transition was, when Bernie put that out in 2020. Um, as like something directly on our political horizon. And certainly the calculus has changed in the sense that like, Bernie doesn't win. Our movement's not in power. It's scary times. It's scary neoliberal times with Biden. But that just means even more so that it's important for us to get back to those kind of roots. And just transition, I think, is a very important commitment. And I don't think that people who are saying it are wrong to say it. I think that it's a very important um, point, but I think that where we need to get better is moving beyond um is start building roadmaps to actually like outline what it is that we want to see happen, and also roadmap what needs to happen in order to make those things a reality. And I think for a lot of people, because like it's a serious problem when you have a lot of people in this country who have been burned by globalization, when you have a lot of people who you know don't paint too rosy a picture of what the current state of working in those industries is, right? Because they're rife with problems. And, I think one of the most immediate things you can do, particularly if you live in areas um, where people are working in those kind of industries, is finding ways for our movement to be showing up for them today, right? So there's a lot of things going on in the current state, the current arrangement, right? Fossil fuel capitalism, right? There's a lot of fights that are happening right now that it's important for us to be showing up for. Um, but like it's a real question for any kind of transition is what happens to all the people who are reliant on this current system from both the consumer and the producer level, for a transition into a different kind of economy. And I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, we have a just transition, right? And like the investigation sort of stopped there. And I think that you really need to start working out what that looks like, and not to repeat myself too much, but also how you'd be able to achieve that. And I think that that's like the challenge that we're at right now. Let's see. I don't know why. I mean, I think you'd have to you need to provide more of an argument that a dollar invested in renewables and efficiency generates more working class income than a dollar invested in fossil fuel energy infrastructure. I mean, I think that you would need to, make a case for that, because as the system is sort of set up right now, those renewable energy systems are hyper exploitative, and we're not even talking about working conditions. We're just talking about where the money goes. Um, compare like solar to something like nuclear. Nuclear is a system that creates permanent union jobs in communities, right? Where installing solar panels doesn't necessarily create that kind of permanent relation. I mean, people who might do that, right? Electricians who might work on those kind of systems are not going to want to have to drive 3 hours outside of Austin or San Antonio to go and install panels, right? Compared to what they could do within their own community, right? And those kind of jobs, they're not permanent enough to maintain an industry. I'm not saying it can't happen, but under the current model, it doesn't necessarily work like that. And that's the problem that we're getting at right here, is that the way that the renewable system is being set up is the exact same kind of capitalist exploitative system as we're supposedly leaving. And socialists should be arguing for a system which actually creates the scenario that you're lining out. We're investing in the infrastructure of renewables, investing in energy production in general is something that has a permanent positive effect for both workers and for consumers. But I can't sit here and say that that's the case right now. In fact, a lot of these industries, it's quite bad currently, friend. All right. It's always good to see our friends on Twitch, and just reminding our Twitch family, that we're doing a special all June to have. We're releasing our post game, which is typically patrons only. Immediately after the main show on Wednesdays, we're releasing those for free on our twitch.tv/Left Reckoning channel. We had Ben Burgess on last week, and we'll be doing much more in the near future. And this is an important point from Twitch too. U.S. Department of Energy is investing billions in different energy solutions, research and development, which is great, true. Unfortunately, there's still an extreme culture of handing over all control and commercialization of state-funded tech to private industries with no strings attached. Absolutely, and like this is one of the big problems with solar and wind right now, is that you have this insane tax credit system, which basically excludes the federal government or the government at large from competing with private industry, right? That's something that was baked in by the right wing and very happily accepted by the Democratic Party. And that's bad, right? We should be having those technologies being socially controlled and implemented in ways that benefit all of us, not just a few investors and capitalists. And like that's one of the things that's really worrying about the transition that we're seeing right now, is that capitalists, I mean, sorry to keep repeating the same word over and over, have really embedded themselves in that system and have gotten carve outs to prevent any kind of government competition there. And like that's very dangerous, right? Because you shouldn't want the power system that we use to be controlled by private interests. And yeah, it's certainly worrying. And like I understand why people are quick to they don't get as worked up about it, because the current state of affairs is so bad. But if you're actively fighting to create a system which is also going to be bad on the other side, you're making a mistake. When we have the capability and the capacity right now, there's energy and there's movement on this stuff to start demanding something different. um it's a very weird moment right now. Well, Server Dislike says, I wish DSA would more aggressively pursue outright labor organizing campaigns. I highly suggest you read the rank and file strategy, which has just come out over the past few weeks. I think it's a very strong case for building up that kind of capacity. Has the U.S. left been following the Paul Mason revelations? I mean, I'll say I have, as has Matt. Pretty wild stuff. I mean, Paul Mason, I think, has just completely lost it. It's been a very wild thing to see his trajectory from trying to make a socialist or social democratic case for Keir Starmer to now basically trying, encouraging members of the British state to start coming after journalists. I mean, they came after not just, some of the outlets that you would expect, but Novara Media and Progressive International, which is truly something to behold. Thank you, John. Always appreciate hearing from you. Totally. A just transition makes, Kowalski says, a just transition also makes sense just from a practical standpoint of retooling all of our industry and infrastructure. I totally agree. I mean, I think building off of the Green New Deal, I think building off of the TVA is a really great model for us to be following the footsteps of. And then Dustin Guastella has a really strong piece in the most recent print edition of Jacobin on this. Fred Stafford and a friend of the show, Matt Huber. Fred Stafford's a friend of the show too, but he doesn't do interviews. Wrote a really great piece called In Defense of the TVA, which I highly suggest people read, in addition to Matt Huber's book, Climate Change is Class War, if you haven't picked that up already. And if you haven't seen our interview with Matt Huber, I highly suggest checking that out as well. Let's see. We love all of our audience. I don't know why y'all need to compete with each other. Even the management, Secret Asian Dan says, even the management of federal labs is handed over to private industry. No, I mean, it's absurd the amount of gifts that we give to private industry in this country. I don't know what this means. I'm not trying to do too much Amazon promotion, but Daredevil says, I don't know if you and Matt know this, but I would encourage viewers with Amazon Prime to link their Twitch accounts so they can have a free monthly membership. Sounds good. Also, if people don't want to support Amazon, always feel free to jump on patreon.com/left reckoning instead of doing any of the kind of Twitch kind of subsystems that we have. It's free to watch for everybody. The streams are going on Twitch are free to watch for everybody, regardless of whatever your relationship is to Twitch or Amazon. Well, let's see. I know we got a couple more. Oh yeah, well, send us some of your Amazon money then. Oh yeah, and congrats to Matt's debut. Very happy to see Matt is going to be doing these streams. I'm hoping once a week, but we'll see. He did his first solo stream as well, which it seems like it went very well. It's always good to see Matt doing stuff like that because Matt's got some super fans, man. I keep on telling him that he should be showing his face a little bit more for them. They're always happy to see him. But y'all, I'm at the end of the questions. If anyone gets maybe one or two more and before it's over, I'll wait just a second. But if not, I might roll. I hope that there was some good food for thought there on Green New Deal and just transition. I mean, a lot of questions there. And, I try not to be moralistic about this because we're all working through these things together. But I've just been getting very worried about this question because I just don't know if we're really building up our kind of power, like our capacity to do it, and also like a strong understanding of like what it is that we really want to do. Because like at the end of the day, and this is not trying to be against this fight. I mean, I care about this fight immensely. This is why I get worked up about it. We spend so much time on this program in recent months talking about it. But I get worked up about it sometimes when I see people not really taking these questions seriously, because like, we're asking people to like change the way the system functions. Like you need to think about what that means, and how you're going to do it and what that's going to look like, because the way the current dynamic works, you could be giving our opponents a very, very powerful tool to implement mass austerity on people. I mean, we've already seen what that looks like in France under Macron, and you would be delusional to think that there aren't interests in the American system too, to basically try to push mass austerity on people in the guise of climate action. And we need to be owning this and leading this, because in absence, I mean, things can get really, really nasty really, really quickly. But I think I'm going to run. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, 7 Central. We're going to be joined by Derek Davison and Danny Bessner, good friends of the show, also the host of the American Prestige podcast. You can also find their work at Foreign Exchange on Substack, which is a phenomenal resource if you're not already using that. And yeah, hopefully I'll get some more stuff out in the near future, y'all. As always, feel free to reach out with any questions. You can send me an email, but make sure it's nice. And I'll see y'all tomorrow evening. All right. Take care, everybody.